I cheated with his best friend, but didn't know he had planted hidden cameras. Hello, Reddit. My name is Dorothy, and I'm 28 years old. I am married with 2 kids. I don't work. I'm a full-time housewife, and my husband has his own tech company, which he built up from the start. I have a situation, and I really need some advice. It's about my husband, Francis. He is threatening to leave me and also take custody of our children, and it's all my fault, really. I've been trying really hard to get Francis to forgive me, but he just wouldn't listen to me. I did something really bad, and now I'm about to lose everything. I'm about to lose my whole life, and I am desperate to get Francis to forgive me so that everything will be back to its normal place. I cheated. I cheated on my husband. I cheated with his best friend, but didn't know he had planted hidden cameras. And then he caught me red-handed, and now he wants absolutely nothing to do with me. Another big problem is, Francis married me against his family's wishes, so they don't like me very much. Scratch that, they don't like me at all. Francis's sister hates my guts, and his mother just tolerates me, barely, because of her lovely grandkids. And now they found out about my affair with my husband's best friend, and they are threatening to throw me out if I don't move out on my own. The worst thing is, they took away my kids. According to them, they do not want them corrupted by me. The thing is, I know for sure I did a horrible thing, but if I could get Francis to forgive me, everything would be fine again. They would have no choice but to return my kids, and we would be a happy family once again. I know I should probably give you guys more information, and probably a reason why I thought it was a good idea to cheat on my husband with his best friend. Growing up as a child, I've always wanted an out. I got tired of things very easily, and it had made me try out a lot of things and quit because I just discovered halfway through that it wasn't my thing. And then I found another interest almost immediately. My parents got frustrated with me most of the time because of how easily I quit. I was involved in a lot of sports as a teenager, but I kept quitting and moving to another one as soon as I found it. I joined the volleyball team and then decided I didn't like it anymore. Then I joined the basketball team and decided it was too strenuous. Then I joined the cheerleading squad, but decided their dancing was too much, and so many others. When it was finally my final year of high school, I had a hard time deciding on the school I wanted to go to. My friends wanted to go to schools that were farther from home, but because of how much I hated inconveniences, I didn't want to be far from home, but I still had a hard time deciding what I wanted. My parents wanted me to go to the same university they did. Apparently, it was where they had met and fallen in love, but I didn't want to go there. So eventually I ended up staying a whole year after high school at home because I had a hard time choosing a university. Eventually I chose a college very close to home so I could go from home to school. Funny thing is, I was always good at what I did. I didn't lose interest in all of those things because I was bad or terrible at them. In fact, I always made an impression, and the coaches were always bummed to see me go. I just got tired of things easily and wanted to move on to the next exciting thing. My parents even told me that as a child, I always wanted a new toy every day and would throw a tantrum until I got one. When I got into college, I couldn't decide what course I wanted, so I just attended for a semester first, before getting to the major course choosing issue. I decided I wanted to be a biologist, because I was intrigued with science eventually. I didn't graduate as a biologist, though. I quit in my final year of school. I was tired of schooling. I just couldn't handle things anymore, so I decided to quit. My parents were so furious with me that they sent me away. They told me to only come home when I discovered what I wanted, and it had to be something permanent. Life without my parents' money and comfortable home was hard. I had to stay with a friend who lived in a very uncomfortable room with lots of her stuff gathered inside the tiny space. It made the tiny space even tinier, and it made me very uncomfortable. She introduced me to a waitress job, and I did that for a month so I could pay back all the money she lent me, so we could pay the rent together and also split other bills. I got tired of the job, so I quit. My friend was frustrated, but she eventually got me another job. But just as soon as she got me a job in a cafe, I quit it. She was angry when I quit without any valid reason and refused to help me get another job. So I went job hunting on my own, which was really difficult as I had no skills or educational background. My friend kept demanding my rent and other bills by the end of each month, and I had no job. Life was hard, and I just gave up and went back to my parents. I begged them to take me back, and I had even signed a written agreement that I would not quit anything I ventured into again without a valid reason. I went back to school and finished it. Luckily, my parents had somehow been able to influence my school to sign a leave of absence. Apparently, they believed I would be sensible after staying out on the street for a while. It was during that period I met James, my first boyfriend, whom I dated for only 2 months before I ended things between us. Not because he cheated or did something. I broke up with him because he didn't do anything. He was just boring and unexciting. He didn't do things without first planning them, and he even had a strict schedule he followed each day. He even planned our dates or outings. He wasn't spontaneous, and it was so boring to me. I wanted someone exciting, and James wasn't it at all, so I just ended things between us. The other guy I dated before meeting Francis had been Samuel, but we didn't even date for more than a month before breaking up. I was the one who ended things again because he was too spontaneous. He made decisions without planning them properly, and he just seemed to take many risks. He'd lose lots of money because of the many stupid decisions he made without first thinking, and he even lost half of my money too on a business idea that went south. I ended things with him before he ruined me, and that was when I met Francis. I was working as a lab assistant in a research clinic then. I wasn't enthusiastic about the job, as I was 2 weeks into the job. But I couldn't quit because of my signed promise to my parents. It was so frustrating working there, being bossed around like a child. I hated it and wanted to quit, but my parents were adamant and insisted I stick with it. It was there I met Francis. The laboratory needed some sort of tech thing. I cannot explain what it is because despite being good at everything else, I am useless at anything technology related. I literally cannot even do it at all, so I don't bother trying to learn about it. Francis's services had been employed by the lab I worked with on that particular project. Francis had been interested in me ever since he walked into the lab, and I in him. I liked him because he was very much everything I had always wanted, and he even ticked all my boxes. Francis and I became fast friends, and we were always texting and calling each other. It didn't take long before Francis asked me to be his girlfriend. But I liked Francis way too much, and I was scared I would lose interest in him if I agreed too quickly, like I did with my other relationships. Francis is special, and I didn't want our relationship to fizzle. So I kept stalling, and we still continued to be friends for about 3 more months before I finally agreed to be his girlfriend. I was surprised that my feelings didn't change, and that I couldn't find a fault, like I did with the rest, that would make me not want to go on. Francis was just perfect, and he was everything I've ever wanted and will ever want. We dated for 3 months before Francis popped the question. Yes, we didn't date for long because we were so sure we wanted each other, and that we just couldn't wait. But there was a problem. Francis's sister and mother didn't agree with our marriage. They felt it was too fast, and that I was not good enough for Francis. My parents felt that it was too fast too, but had given their blessings when they realized how in love with Francis I was. Francis married me against all odds, and his sister and mother had no choice in the matter. We got married, and since I was no longer bound by my parents' agreement, I quit my job. Francis was okay with me quitting when I told him I wanted to be a stay-at-home wife and mother. He clearly earns more than enough to cater to our kids and me. Our marriage was barely 2 months old when I got pregnant with my first daughter. Francis was so happy, and he had excitedly started all the planning and even started making a room ready for our daughter. My pregnancy journey was quite smooth despite all my fears. I only got bigger, but I didn't end up with big pimples and some crazy hormonal imbalance like some women. The only usual thing was the cravings, and Francis made sure I got every one of my cravings, so I was happily pregnant. I gave birth to our daughter, and Francis was there throughout the labor process. He was there to hold our daughter and cut her umbilical cord, and we named her Elise because she definitely looked like a curious child, which she grew to be. Elise was barely a year old when I got pregnant again. I was shocked because I had no idea something like that could happen, and I was still breastfeeding. I even had my menstrual period all through, so I had not guessed I was pregnant, until I had gone for a medical checkup with Elise. The doctor had jokingly called my husband an active footballer just by looking at me, and I was greatly offended by it until I had gone home and bought a pregnancy kit, which confirmed everything. I told Francis, and we had gone to meet the doctor and ask questions, and the doctor had eased me up. I again went through the pregnancy journey, but it wasn't as easy as when I was pregnant with Elise. But then again, I had Francis, and he was there for everything. After I gave birth to Sarah, I told Francis I didn't want to get pregnant again. I love my babies, and I cherish every moment with them, but I just got tired of going through the same process, especially after the second pregnancy, which was quite difficult. I even had to have a cesarean section to deliver her because of how hard it was. After I gave birth to Sarah, I got pregnant again when Sarah was barely 4 months. I didn't tell Francis this time or anybody else. I didn't want the baby, and I knew if I told Francis, he would convince me to keep it. I went secretly to the hospital to get rid of the baby. Francis didn't find out until after the abortion, and he had been so sad and angry with me. He said I made the decision for him without giving him the chance to even choose. I just apologized over and over again, and it took a whole week before Francis was able to even look at me properly again. I knew never to offend him again because that was the first time I had actually seen Francis that angry, and it was quite scary, especially the way he ignored me around the house for a whole week. I even tried seducing him so maybe we would have makeup sex, but Francis didn't even respond to all my tricks. I cried one time and begged him, but he still didn't bother about me. When he finally forgave me, I knew I just could not afford to offend him again because of how hard-hearted he is. I guess that's the reason he was able to go against his sister's and Mum's wishes to marry me. Once he's determined to do anything, he would, no matter how convincing the person might be. My girls grew up and started going to kindergarten, leaving me with nothing to do around the house. I was bored. When I had the girls with me morning, afternoon, and night, there was no rest period because my girls are super active, and they needed to be watched every minute because of how touchy they got with things, especially things they shouldn't be found touching. But then, I only had to watch them half a day when they started schooling, and it left me bored and alone in the house, and I didn't like that one bit. I knew if I told Francis how I felt, he would suggest I try going back to work, but I didn't even want to work at all. I tried different hobbies, but I just wasn't feeling any of it. Francis noticed me trying to switch to different hobbies, and he had tried to help me stick to one, but I was upset with him for trying to tell me what to do. I knew he was trying to help, but I just didn't want to accept his help or anything like that. I just wanted to do things on my own and not be forced to stick to something like my parents did. It was during a family dinner I met Francis's best friend, Matt. Matt had not been able to attend our wedding because he was out of the country for work, and he couldn't abandon work. He had sent a monetary gift to Francis and me, though. Before I met him at all, I already knew a lot of things about him because that was how much Francis spoke about his best friend. He told me that they've been friends since high school, and that they went to the same university, although they studied different courses, but they lived together as roommates. They've been through thick and thin, and they always talked every other day, even though Matt was away. Francis filled him with every detail about what was happening here in our town, and he did the same thing about where he was. Sometimes I always wondered if they had something because of how much they spoke. So when I learned that Matt was finally going to be around, I was curious to finally meet him in person. Although I had seen pictures of him, I just wanted to meet him in person and know whether all said about him was true. The family dinner was planned by Francis's sister for their mother for her birthday. She decided on dinner because Francis had a business trip that day, but would be back just in time for dinner. I know she hates my guts, so I didn't bother trying to help plan anything. I just showed up at the party, and since my kids, who always made their grandmother even look at me, were already in bed, I was just basically ignored throughout the party. I didn't mind because I didn't know most of the people at the party. They were their friends and not mine, so I just stuck with myself, sipping my drink and waiting for my husband to show up. Matt had shown up at the table where I sat, and he dragged a chair out for himself while smiling flirtatiously at me. I knew who he was instantly, but I guess he didn't know who I was at first glance, perhaps because of all the layers of makeup I applied just to look good and intimidating, especially to Francis's sister. He started a conversation with me, asking why I was alone at a party when I could easily steal the show from the birthday girl. He meant my mother-in-law. I laughed, and he had seen that as encouragement to go on. He continued to say silly things, and I just laughed at his naughty jokes. It was only when Francis arrived and had kissed my cheek while asking Matt why he was busy flirting with his wife that he realized just who it was that he had been talking to for over 30 minutes. He apologized, but I had dismissed it and told Francis that he kept me busy while I was waiting for him. I knew from the way Matt stared at me, he wasn't sorry at all that he flirted with me. He kept staring at me as if I was a juicy mango that he wanted to lick off. I liked the attention way too much than I anticipated. Maybe because ever since I got married, he had been the first person to show some level of interest in me. So I was kind of happy to know that I still looked attractive. After the dinner party, Matt started visiting us more often than was normal. Francis didn't see it as anything strange because he loved having him around. But then it became very obvious to me who exactly he was visiting when he started showing up at times when Francis wasn't home and the kids had gone to school. He would come and keep me company and stay until it was time for me to pick up the kids. We would mostly talk about anything except the obvious fact that it wasn't exactly cool to be visiting a married woman in her home, particularly when her husband wasn't in, even if he was a friend. He also worked remotely, especially after the job that had kept him away from home for so long. The first time Matt and I slept together, it was because of a situation. That day I was horny, very horny in fact. Whenever I am ovulating, I tend to get very horny, and Francis always helped out in those situations. We would make love countless times, and it was always amazing, really. But this time, Francis had to travel out of town for work and wouldn't be back for 2 days. He apologized for not being around, and would even call me on video calls and talk dirty so I could relieve myself. But it just wasn't enough. I wanted a man's touch, and it was driving me crazy. And then Matt was around that day. I couldn't even fall asleep the night before because I was so sexually frustrated, and I only managed to get the kids ready for school. I had to call the cleaner to help me drop off the kids at school because I wasn't feeling up to it. So I was home alone as usual, trying to make myself less frustrated sexually. I even played porn so I could maybe relieve myself in some way, but it wasn't working. I didn't realize that I had forgotten to lock the door when I stepped out with the kids so that Emma could take them to school. That was how disoriented I was. So Matt had walked in on me with my hands in my panties and porn playing on the TV. And I couldn't say anything because there wasn't exactly anything I could say. He didn't say anything either, just watched me. I should have just gotten up, adjusted myself, killed the movie, and blamed everything on me missing my husband and all that. But I had just stayed frozen to that spot, watching Matt watch me. Then he had moved very quickly and had just removed my hand and replaced it with his. I should have moved away and slapped him, but I was so horny and desperate for a man's touch. I just kept on moaning and encouraging him with my moans. Well, we ended up having sex that morning. And maybe because I was so horny, I had multiple orgasms. After the whole thing, I started to regret it, knowing that if Francis ever found out what happened between his best friend and me, he would never forgive me. Or perhaps it would take a whole year or two, or even many years before he would forgive me. I told Matt that we made a mistake and that it could never happen again, and I begged him not to tell Francis, no matter how guilty he felt. I made him swear to keep our secret between us. Matt had told me he couldn't let Francis find out either because of their very long-term friendship, which would definitely be ruined if he did tell him. So we both agreed that we couldn't tell Francis, and it couldn't happen again. In fact, to prove that point, Matt stopped visiting for about a week, and I was glad and relieved. It meant he understood that things couldn't happen again between us. When Francis had come home from his trip, he wanted to go to bed with me, despite being exhausted, and I had refused and insisted he take his bath, eat, and sleep. Francis was surprised at how calm I was, because he obviously knew how crazy I could get when I was horny, although he respected my wishes and had done as I asked. When he woke up late in the evening and was feeling better, we had sex. And that was because I didn't want him suspecting that I may have found another way to relieve myself. After that 1 week that Matt stayed away from our home, he started showing up again. The first time had been because Francis had insisted he come around to spend Sunday with him. I tried so hard not to make my reactions to Matt obvious because I knew how observant Francis is. It was one of the qualities that made him so good at his job and also made him a good husband and father. He easily picked up on moods, and he always tried to do something about it. So it was quite difficult pretending to be comfortable around Matt with Francis right there. Eventually, when I couldn't stand it anymore, I lied about going to call the kids to check on them. They were spending the weekend with their grandparents, my mom and dad. I excused myself from them and went into our room to panic and pray that Matt didn't say anything about us to Francis. Francis came into the room an hour later, and I pretended to be asleep because I knew he obviously knew I was tense, and I didn't want to have to answer questions that I had no answers to. Francis left me alone and had gone back to his friend. Well, luckily, Matt didn't spill, and neither did I. We managed to keep our mouths shut about everything that happened between us. Soon enough, Matt started visiting again. At first, he had said it was because he didn't want us behaving awkwardly around Francis again, so we had to see each other often and be comfortable in each other's presence again. So I agreed with his logic. But it didn't take very long before we started having sex again. This time, there was no stopping. We would literally be naked from the time he came in until the time he had to leave, and we kept lying to each other that it was to be comfortable in each other's presence, especially around Francis. I had more sex with Matt than I could count, and I managed to even remove the guilt from my mind. Well, it was still there, but at the very back of my mind, the farthest place really. But you never can get away with these things for long now, can you? Francis must have started suspecting me that one day he came home rather early. Matt and I were having rough sex as usual when I heard Francis's car drive into the garage. I panicked and shoved Matt and all his clothes into the guest room toilet, begging him not to make a sound. But in my state of panic, I forgot his shoes outside the house and his shirt on the couch. Francis noticed them the instant he entered and questioned me about them. I lied quickly that they belonged to Emma, our cleaner. She had come with them and dropped them there while she cleaned because she was going to give them to her older brother. What I forgot at that moment was that Emma was an orphan and had been raised in an orphanage with no siblings, and Francis knew that because he had been the one who interviewed her for the cleaning job. But he didn't say anything and just took the documents he came for and left. It was after he left that I realized that in my state of panic, I wore my dress upside down and my hair looked messy. I knew Francis would suspect me, and it made me so scared. I told Matt to leave that day, and I knew I had to do something to cover up, so I told Emma to lie to Francis that it was actually a guy she called a brother in her street who owned the clothes and shoes. And I pretended to be sick and disoriented for the next day, so it would seem like I was only just sick when he came in that day. Francis didn't behave oddly after the whole thing, and I believed that my plans had worked perfectly. What I didn't know was that Francis had cameras installed in the house after that incident. And he had it done when I was out with the kids. He had convinced me to go out with them for a picnic, knowing how excited the kids got about things like that. When I insisted he come with us, he told me he had a slight headache and would just prefer to stay at home and rest instead. We took a long time at the park because the kids didn't want to leave and kept begging for one more hour until it was late in the evening. Francis even called to check in on us at that point. So I finally was able to drag the girls back home when I promised them dessert after dinner. Francis didn't act out of place and still behaved normally with me, so I didn't even suspect a thing about what he had done to the house. The camera he installed was quite small and almost invisible if you weren't aware of it, and because I was clueless about things like that, when I first noticed it, I thought it was a cobweb and made a mental note to tell Emma to try removing it. But then I forgot about it. Francis went out of town for business for 2 days, and Matt showed up as usual, and we did our usual routine. In fact, this time, not aware of the camera looking down at us at all, we had done different sexual styles against the couch. Styles that I never permitted Francis to try with me because I felt they were dirty and I didn't like them. Matt had me tied up against the couch and would hit me with his belt until I was red and tender, and then we had sex for hours before he left. Francis surprisingly came home that same day, and instead of speaking to me, He just ignored me and went to bed. I was surprised because I knew of nothing I did to upset him. The next day, his mom and sister showed up to pick the girls because it was their turn to watch them that weekend, and Francis had asked them to stay for breakfast. I was surprised, and even his mom and sister were too. Francis never invited them to stay over before because of how uncomfortable he knew I was around them. So when he suggested it, in fact, insisted on it, everyone was surprised. They stayed for breakfast, and it was very awkward because no one knew what to say to the other. We were halfway through breakfast when Francis said he had an announcement. Curious about what it might be, I stopped eating and focused on him. Francis announced that we were getting a divorce and that he was taking custody of our girls. I was so shocked that I burst out laughing on the spot and told him to stop joking around. Francis looked at me seriously and asked if I thought he was really joking. I was so shocked, and I asked why, but instead of Francis answering me, he laughed and walked out of the dining room and then came back holding his laptop and a disc. He inserted the disc and then played the video for everyone to watch. You guessed it right. It was the video of Matt and me having sex, particularly the previous day, when we had decided to try kinky styles. I couldn't even say anything. My mouth was just opening and closing because there was nothing I could say to defend myself. There was video evidence, and I couldn't beat that. I couldn't even call it rape because it showed very clearly that I was into the whole thing. Francis's sister and mom just kept throwing insults at me, and Francis had ordered them out of the house and asked them to take the kids with them. And then he faced me with an order, too. He didn't want me around, and he wanted me out of his life, and his kids, too. I tried begging, but Francis wouldn't listen to me. It's been the 3 most terrible days of my life, and Francis's sister and mom have been coming around and threatening to throw me out while also refusing to let me see my kids. I'm so doomed, guys. Please help me. How do I get Francis to forgive me and love me again? I need some urgent advice, please. Update. Hello, Reddit. To say life is awful would be an unfair thing to say because I literally made life awful for myself through my actions. I did the most horrible thing I could have ever done to ruin my marriage, and now I've ruined my life in the process. How could I have ever thought that I could get away with everything I did? How stupid was I to think that maybe, just maybe, Francis would be forgiving enough to forget my terrible sins and accept me back? I feel so awful and horrible. I'm a terrible person, and I have sinned against Francis, and I know I can never be forgiven. Well, you guys made me realize that fact, because I came here on this app to confess my sins in hopes that maybe someone would perhaps give me advice to get Francis to forgive me or work things out between us. But you guys have instead squashed every hope I had of Francis and me ever getting back together with your very insulting words and comments on my post. I cannot even cast blame. I did this to myself all on my own. My parents won't even take me back after Francis's sister and mom succeeded in throwing me out of the house, with Francis just watching the entire thing without a word. Francis had apparently warned my parents that if they wanted any sort of contact with their grandkids, they should never have any contact with me, and they were willing to forfeit contacting me rather than forfeiting contacting their grandkids. He obviously didn't want a situation where my parents would somehow arrange some sort of way for me to see my kids. He wants to punish me thoroughly, and he's succeeding very well, in fact. I know I did the most horrible thing, and words cannot even express how terrible I feel. I still remember the look on Francis's face when I asked what I did to warrant a divorce and no custody of my kids. The glare and then the short, bitter laughter that followed. I lost the best man I could get all because of my foolishness. I thought, I honestly don't know what I was thinking because I clearly wasn't. If I had been thinking, I would never have allowed things to go that far between Mike and me. Now I've lost everything I had, all because I needed some stupid sexual relief, which Francis was always trying to satisfy me with. But I guess my greed wouldn't allow me until I safely ruined my life. I feel so disconnected from the world. Everyone seems to be moving, but it's like I'm stuck in a time loop, and I cannot go back or to the future. I'm just stuck here in my memories of everything I've done badly and regretted. It's awfully painful. I've lost everything I ever got on a platter of gold because of my stupidity. That thought will probably haunt me for the rest of my life. Update. Hello, Reddit. I know for a fact that you guys do not exactly appreciate my post or even want to see it at all, but I can't just help it. This is the only place I get to express how horrible I feel, because no one wants to listen to me. I'm so lonely and full of regrets. I know you guys do not want me around here because of my sob story as an adulteress, so this is my last post here. Just wanted to say that those who probably said the quote about time healing wounds were totally wrong, and that I'm living proof of that. Or maybe they weren't talking about my type of wounds. Maybe it was for someone like Francis, whom I betrayed by sleeping countless times with his best friend. His wounds will probably heal up, but mine never will. I will forever be here licking up my wounds that will never heal, because I inflicted them on myself all by myself. The thoughts of Francis moving on, and perhaps even getting married to another lady, one who his mother and sister would approve of, and she'd be the mother of my kids, is very tormenting. It kills me every day on the inside, knowing that I will never have that privilege I once had to be a wife and a mother. Funny how, now that I think of it, I quit everything in life. I got tired and moved on to the next thing, but I just couldn't be with Francis and the kids. I wasn't tired of living with and loving him, and then my kids too. But the one thing that should have been my forever ended because I stupidly gave it away. I will never stop regretting the moment I decided to sleep with Matt, because that was the moment I started destroying my home. I will never stop regretting lying repeatedly to Francis while sleeping with another man. I will never stop regretting cheating on him. And I will never stop regretting losing the opportunity to be my children's mother. I will never stop feeling this torment and pain, perhaps for life. Thanks and goodbye.